Ready when you are.
Okay. Hi everybody, welcome to Fried Chicken 101. I'm going to show you how to make the best fried chicken you've ever had. You want super crunchy on the outside and you want super tender and juicy on the inside. The three pillars are going to be your brining, which is immersing the chicken into a liquid of sorts. So it can either be a salt water and herb brine, it can be buttermilk and hot sauce, which is what I prefer, and what we're going to do today. Or you can simply put it in milk, and brining methods and times all vary, but I'm going to show you a very quick way to do that. So the second thing is resting your chicken. So once you get the flour coating on the chicken, you want to let it rest and let it sort of aerate, let air come through. We're actually going to use this little guy, which is going to allow our chicken to rest, and it's going to allow it to let all the flour adhere and really cling onto that chicken so that you can get a really nice crispy mouthfeel on that. And then also what it does is it brings the chicken up to almost room temperature, close to room temperature. And what that's going to help is during the frying process. It's not going to bring down the temperature of the oil too much whenever you immerse it, which can leave you ending up with really soggy, inedible chicken. So let's get started. What we're going to do is start with the brining because we want to get the bird in its bath as soon as possible. We're going to start with the Crystal hot sauce, which is my favorite. You can use a Frank's or a Pete's hot sauce, Frank's Red Hot. Tabasco I don't recommend. It has a really vinegary flavor to it, and you don't really want to impart that into the chicken. You just want to pack in as much flavor as you can in a short amount of time, and this will allow you to do that. We're going to add 3 eggs to the hot sauce, and then we're going to add in about 1/3 of a cup of buttermilk to this whole mixture. Doesn't seem like a lot of liquid, but once we get the chicken sort of doused in the house seasoning that I'll talk about in just a few minutes, it will all be nice and immersed in there. We're going to add, like I said, about 1/3 of a cup of buttermilk. You're going to pour it in. And it's going to kind of turn this sort of orangey pink color, and it's going to smell like the hot sauce, but don't be afraid because it's really going to just pack in a little bit of flavor, a nice punch if you will, because we're doing a very quick brine, which we don't have a lot of time. I think in New York City most of us work, we're all time starved, and this is a really good way to get your chicken. The next step, what we're going to do is actually add the house seasoning, which you have in your packet, but basically it's a combination of garlic powder, salt, and pepper. And it really does add, in a very short amount of time, a really nice punch of flavor. Again, it's about adding depth of flavor in a really short amount of time. So essentially, we're going to douse the chicken really well. And if you think that it looks like too much, it's probably not, okay? And you just want to keep one hand on the raw chicken at all times and don't contaminate your bottle of the house seasoning. I'm just going to lay it into the brine just like that. And as soon as we get all of these pieces nice and covered, we're going to let this mixture hang out for about 30 minutes, 45 minutes. This is really simple, you guys. It's one of those things where I think if you just saw it, which you're obviously taking the class now, see how easy it is, it's something that you would be more inclined to make at home on a regular basis. You're going to give your hands a wash. We're going to cover the fried chicken and let it hang out. Now, while we're letting this hang out, we're going to get the flour mixture together. And essentially, you want approximately 3 cups. Give or take, it's okay. You can just sort of do this with your knife. We're going to add 1½ teaspoons of black pepper to this. And I usually like to use a nice coarse black pepper because it really shows up better on the chicken when you bite into it. So 1½ teaspoons to the 3 cups of flour, and voila. That's essentially your mix. So keep in mind that you've got the flavors of the garlic, the black pepper, and the salt already in the brine. And you're just adding a little extra. You want to get it nice and incorporated in here. Doesn't take but just a couple of minutes, a couple seconds. And then what I like to do, because I like mine spicy, I love really, really spicy chicken, is to take the cayenne pepper. And you can add as much or as little as you want. And I will tell you, if you like things spicy, I go with like the 4 to 5 tablespoon range. Some people really don't like that much, so you can go a little bit easier with it. But I like my flour mixture to be a little bit pink from the pepper. And again, this is where you as students get to add your own unique experiences, your own flavor profiles, whatever it is that you really like. This is your opportunity to do that. So if you want to have an Indian flavor, add some curry, add some yellow curry. If you want just color and you don't really want it to taste like much, add some paprika. You can do really whatever you want here. But a word of caution, if you add in fresh herbs, you really want to do that in the brining portion, not here, because they'll burn. As they're frying, those things tend to burn first. And then, how many of you have ever eaten Popeye's fried chicken or Kentucky Fried Chicken, which has, I mean, I know that they're kind of awful, but they're amazing. The nice crispy crunchy pieces, the really large pieces that are on the chicken. The way that we're going to cheat that, the way that we're going to achieve that is to do a little trick where you put in about 6 tablespoons of buttermilk. And you want to start doing like this and running the flour through your fingers to break it up a little bit and create those nice crunchy, what will be those nice crunchy pieces. You don't want too large of the pieces or they'll be really sort of gummy. You just want to break it up a little bit. So essentially this is what it's going to look like. You're going to have pieces that are pretty even, fairly even, and it's going to be ready as soon as the chicken is done brining. It's going to be ready for the coating. Okay, so after we've brined and we've made our coating mixture, we're actually ready now to go ahead and get the chicken in there. One little trick that I've learned, and I sometimes abide by, but not always, is if you work with one hand for the wet ingredients and then you flour with another hand, so that basically you don't end up with clumps of stuff on your fingers. So basically I'm going to put the wet in like that. I'm going to use this hand to coat. But listen, if this is your first time or even your first several times of making the chicken, if it's easier for you just to get in there with both hands, do it. Whatever makes it easier for you. And anyway, we can all wash our hands. This one is a big daddy. I think it needs another coating. Toss it around, give it a nice little toss. Again, don't be afraid. Don't be timid whenever you're using this, whenever you're applying the flour coating. And again, it's the resting game, so we're just gonna let it hang out for a little bit. 30 minutes is sufficient, 30 to 45 minutes. You can even do it up to an hour and a half. That kind of sounds a little bit crazy, but again, on some of these larger pieces, you really don't want them to be cold in the middle because they're not gonna cook as well. So the outside's gonna cook faster than the inside's gonna cook. Just remember that. So it's really important that we let it rest. So this brings us to the last of the 3 pillars. We had the brining, we had the resting, and now we have the frying. I really do prefer to use a peanut oil. It's a little bit more expensive, but the flavor is really a lot better to me than anything. But you know, if you don't want to spend the money, you can always do a vegetable oil. Crisco is fine. Cast iron is king whenever you're frying. It maintains a heat throughout the entire pan, so it really does help you with your oil temperatures not fluctuating too much. You can also use a stainless steel skillet. You can also use aluminum. It's up to you. I mean, one of the families that I cook privately for, they have a wok, and I use the wok to fry their chicken in, but I prefer cast iron. We're gonna stick with this one because it's a little more shallow, and shallow frying is a little bit better bet that you're not gonna undercook the chicken. So essentially what that means is that you're going to immerse the chicken once the oil gets hot enough, and it's only going to come about halfway up one side of the chicken. So then you're going to flip halfway through. If you guys don't own a thermometer, you can do a quick little trick that always helps me know whenever the oil is going to be ready. You just take some of that flour mixture that you had, and if you drop it in and that piece automatically starts to float like this, then your oil is pretty much ready. Okay, so you just want to remove that. And let's get to frying some chicken. But if you can see, there's like a nice light fry going on here. That's really what you want. You don't want grease splattering all over everything because that probably means that your oil temperature is too high. You can actually take the lid, and this is something that my brilliant mother does, is she covers her chicken at this point. So it's steaming the chicken, which means that it's going to be cooked all the way through. If you have any doubts about whether or not you're going to end up with bloody chicken, which is the worst thing ever, then you can always cover it for a few minutes. Set your timer in the kitchen for 15 minutes, and that way you have some sort of frame of reference for how long you're actually frying. So what we're going to do, so that you can see what's going on, is we're going to take the lid off, and actually you can start to smell the chicken at this point, and it really does start to smell really amazing. You can start to notice a couple of the smaller pieces, like a nice little golden brown. Don't want to play with it too much, but you don't want to let it get too brown on any one side. So if you need to give it a little flip, you can do that. If you have a gas range, it's really better to keep it on about 5. I usually turn it up as far as the temperature of the gas goes, on 6 to get it nice and going. And then as soon as I sort of do that little test with the flour to see if it's ready to fry, I'll turn it down to 5, in between 5 and 6, and it's a really good medium-high temperature to cook on. You want to use tongs for the chicken that's raw, and to take it out, you want to use a fresh pair of tongs because you don't want to contaminate and end up with sick guests. On the medium to large pieces, you want to fry them anywhere between 8 to 10 minutes a piece on either side. You can go a little bit longer, 12 minutes, if it's a really large breast. And the smaller pieces, you'll notice, get done much, much quicker. So it really depends again on the size of the chicken, but a good rule of thumb is to give your chicken a good 13 minutes on the smaller pieces and a good 18 to 19 minutes on the really large pieces. And listen, the last thing that you want to do is serve raw chicken. I've actually had the temperature up too high on the oil before. It's been a while since I've done that, but it has happened before, and then you end up with really nice, beautiful looking chicken on the outside, but then on the inside it doesn't run clear. The juices don't run clear. There's blood. So what you can do, you know, it's not all lost at this point. You just basically would go to the oven at that point, and you would let it bake at around 350 for about 20 minutes. And then you still maintain that crunchy texture, but you've alleviated the problem of having bloody chicken on the inside. So we're ready to take out some of the smaller pieces. And again, I'm gonna switch tongs because you really want to have fresh, clean tongs. And that's really it. Really easy, and I think anybody that's watching this can understand that this can be made in your own kitchen, no matter how big or how small. You know, and I think what better way to entertain at home with something that people love so much. So for this particular class, I think a really perfect side is a buttermilk biscuit. Light, fluffy, tender, if it's done well. And I'm gonna show you all the ways to do that and to achieve really that nice, tender, flaky biscuit. Again, I think it's one of these items that can be intimidating to some people, but if you follow what I'm doing, I'm gonna show you exactly how to achieve it. This is where there's a little bit less experimentation. Certainly you can add your own items. If you want to add cheddar cheese, or you want to add Old Bay seasoning or chives, you can do that. So there is room for a lot of experimentation, but as far as the basic technique, it's important that people follow that pretty much to a T. So for this segment, we're going to be doing the buttermilk biscuits. It's one of my favorite things to do with fried chicken. You can make a little sandwich out of it the next day and have it with eggs, like an egg and cheese biscuit. It's really, really delicious, and it's really simple to make. There's a couple of key things to know before you get started about the biscuits. You never want to use a rolling pin, ever, whenever you roll out the dough. You want to pat it with your hands, and the reason why is because using the rolling pin is going to form too much gluten, which is going to make a really chewy, textured dough. It's not going to give you that light, tender, flaky biscuit that you're looking for. The other thing that's of really paramount importance is just basically put all of your measured ingredients, including the butter, the baking powder, the baking soda, the salt, and the flour into the freezer prior to, about 30 minutes prior to actually mixing up the biscuits. What that's gonna do, the colder that everything is it's gonna allow that butter to stay nice and cold in the dough, so the completed dough. And what that's gonna do is it's gonna give you these nice, tender, flaky pockets of butter that when it's in the oven and it starts to bake, it's gonna rise. It's gonna create those little air pockets. That's where you get your flakiness from. So it's really important to have cold ingredients. I've just measured out 2 cups of flour. There's only 5 more ingredients. It really couldn't be easier. I'm gonna take 1 teaspoon of salt. I'm gonna add that to the mix. I'm gonna take 1 tablespoon of baking powder. This is baking powder, and you wanna go with aluminum-free baking powder. You end up with a much better biscuit. And then you have the baking soda. A lot of people get these two mixed up, but the baking soda, you just need 1/4 teaspoon. It's important to be accurate. So when I'm measuring out the flour, I'm not saying, oh, maybe this looks like a cup and it's kind of heaping. Really take a butter knife and scrape the top of your flour like this to make sure that you have exactly 2 cups. It's really important in baking to be accurate, whereas in the fried chicken, you don't have to be so much. We're gonna take a whisk, and you're just gonna basically whisk all of these together. So all you're trying to do is just get all of the baking powder, the baking soda, the salt distributed evenly in the flour. Next, you're gonna take your butter that's been chilled, and what I typically do is I'll take the 6 tablespoons and I'll give it a nice little rough chop, so about 1/2-inch pieces. Throw it in the freezer with everything else, get it really nice and cold, and then I'm going to use one of these, a little dough cutter. Very inexpensive, you can get it for $5. And then I'm going to work it into the flour mixture. You can put all of these ingredients in the food processor, give it a few pulses, and it's done. And now I do like to use the food processor when I'm making a double batch of this, just because the less opportunity that you have to put warmth in contact with your ingredients, the more flake that you're going to end up with in the final biscuit. So food processor, you're not touching it with anything, it's just the blade going around and chopping everything the way that you need it to be done. The other way is if you don't have either of these items in your kitchen, which not everybody does, is you basically want to use 2 butter knives. Everybody has these, and you would go like this, cutting the butter back and forth, so pulling the knives into 2 different directions, and essentially you want to end up with pea size, like little green pea size pockets of butter throughout the flour. So this is a really easy way to do it. It takes a little longer than if you're going to use this guy, but it works all the same. I'm going to go around like this. I'm just going to make sure that all of the butter has the flour coating on it, so that whenever you start mixing like this, you really don't have too much that's going to tend to stick on this little guy right here. And if you have butter that sticks there, just take it off. Don't be afraid to touch it. It's okay if you do add a little bit of warmth to it. I mean, the coldness is really what we're looking for, but don't be afraid to touch it. You want little pea-sized pockets of butter. Something like this is actually perfect. So at this point, I think I've got my butter kind of where I need it, the size that I want it. I'm just gonna take a quick feel, and I really think that's perfect. You want to keep these little pieces of butter flecks in there so that you can see them whenever you are finished and you have the dough ready to cut, because again, that's gonna give you your rise, your flaky, tender pockets. It's buttermilk biscuits, so of course we're gonna add buttermilk. 1 cup, all the way around. I usually give it a whirl. And it's basically gonna give us that tang that we're looking for in the fried chicken as well. There's just something about buttermilk that really can't be replicated with anything else. I'm gonna take a fork, and I'm just gonna make sure that all of these ingredients are really well incorporated, right? I'm just gonna give it a stir. This should be a really wet dough. It should not be dry at all. But if you follow these measurements to a T, you should be fine. Before you actually roll out your dough, so essentially we're gonna gather this in a ball, but before we do that, before we put it on the table to pat it down and then cut our biscuits, this is a really good place for you guys to go off on your own and add your own unique flavors. You can do chives and cheddar cheese, you can do Old Bay seasoning, you can do really pretty much anything that you want at this point. Be creative. If you want ham and cheese, add little chunks of cooked ham, make sure that it's cooked before. But add all of that in, and do the same thing that we're about to do, the next step. You just proceed to the next step. And listen, one of my favorite things is a little bit of Old Bay, a little bit of cheddar cheese, a white cheddar cheese, and some ham, some good old country ham cubed up. Bacon is also really delicious. I think, who doesn't love bacon? So you want to get it to this point where you sort of make sure that all of this is combined. You don't want to lay it out yet. You just want to sort of go like this, give it a little pat. You can start to see, if you look, that there are some little flecks of butter. So here and here, pretty much everywhere. That's really what you're looking for. A nice sticky dough and lots of butter flecks. So when we're ready to actually roll out the dough, you want to make sure that your surface is got a little bit of flour on it, because the dough, again, the whole mixture is going to be a little bit wet. That's really the way that you want it. Just rub it around on the table. Take your little ball over here. We're going to gather this up. We're going to pat it down. And we're going to turn it like this, okay? You can feel it all come together at this point. We're going to turn it again. We're going to go in one more time. Essentially, what you're doing here is that you're going to be creating little air pockets. It's sort of like if you were making a puff pastry. You're making the turns so that you then get these little layers. If you need a little extra flour, just give it a little dust. Smooth it out. That way it doesn't stick to anything. If you feel like you can't see any of those pockets of butter, take your dough, put it in the refrigerator, 5-10 minutes, and go from there. Okay, that's gonna allow that butter to harden again. So just pat it out. Don't be afraid of it, but have a light enough touch. Okay. Very important rule of thumb when you're making biscuits. Most people, I think, naturally have a tendency to push down and twist so that you can release the biscuit from the cutter. Don't ever do that, because what that's going to do is shrink and close those layers. You just want to give it a nice little cut, up and down, just like that. Sort of like if you've ever seen a Grand's biscuit or Pillsbury biscuit, the ones in the can, they have those little lines on the side, the little layers. You don't want to mess that up. You want to continue to keep that. So I'm just going to place these on the sheet tray. Now, if you want really super fluffy biscuits that are a little more fluffy on the outside, you would just put them together like this, nuzzle them all together on the sheet tray. If you want the sides to be a little more crunchy, then you would do the exact opposite of that. So basically, this tender fluffy on the outside, and this is going to give you nice and crunchy on the outside. It's all preference. I eat them both ways, whatever you want. I'll even throw on a couple of these little pieces. I don't want to disturb them too much, so I'm just going to put them on like this. They're still just as delicious as the regular ones. We've already preheated the oven to 450, and basically you're going to set your timer. 10 to 12 minutes is really the assured baking time. What I typically do is I'll set the timer for 10 minutes. That way, if I look at it at around the 10-minute mark and some part is browning a little bit more quickly than the other parts, I'll give it a quick turn. Most of us live in these small New York City apartments. If you're somewhere else in the world, you live in an urban area, you can totally understand that. So the kitchens are really small. Sometimes the appliances don't work as well, or they just have little quirks. We have quirky appliances here. And so, you know, if that's the case, start checking your biscuits at around 5 minutes, 6 minutes. And if you need to turn it, give it a quarter turn, just turn the sheet tray. Be quick about it, but just do it really, you know, fast. And that way you have a little more control over the biscuits and the doneness. Okay. So I just want to thank everybody for signing up for the class, and I really hope that you learned something and see now and understand just how easy it is to really entertain at home. I think it's a lost art that's coming back slowly, and what better way than to do it with the fried chicken and biscuits. So thank you so much, and good luck. I can't wait to see your projects.